Okay. Elaine,
And then
we should be ready to go.
Okay. Are we going to see when people filter in, or will we not see that?
They're filtering in. I'm already up to 77, 80. So it's at I don't know if y'all can see it on the bottom of the task bar. Yeah. Now we're up to 93. Let's give it 1 minute to kind of slow. Although it seems like it is now. Okay, I think we're good to go.
Perfect. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Elena Stoffel. I'll be the host for today's breakout session. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a second-year Master in Social Work student with the School of Social Work. I'm a white woman in my mid-20s with brown curly hair. I'm wearing a black shirt with a gold accent piece, and I am sitting in a room with a green background. As was stated in the description for this panel, disability support is often one of the areas of health equity that is often compromised. The goal of this session is to listen, learn, and ask questions to better provide services to families that include an individual with a disability. So now we'll just give some time for our panelists to introduce themselves. Ida, and then Felicia, and then Cheryl.
Hi, my name is Ida Winters. I am a Black female in my 40s. I have long Black braids. I have white earrings that says unapologetically Black. There's a Black female on there. I have on a white top with Black polka dots.
Hello, my name is Felica Turner-Walton. I am a Black woman in my 40s. I am wearing a blue and white jacket, and I have brown and gold coppered locks. And I am in the Madison area with an orange background and certificates on my wall.
Good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Funmaker. I am a Native American woman in her 50s, wearing glasses and wampum jewelry. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. And then for a brief overview for the session, we're going to allow some time for Ida, Felicia, and Cheryl just to give their background. And then we're going to ask people to put in some questions. We really want this to be a collaborative time for you all to be able to ask the questions that you really would like some answers to, especially after our opening plenary speaker. So while they're introducing themselves, please feel free to submit some questions relating to how to best provide services and how to conduct yourselves in communities, or anything related to disability justice, and then we'll filter through those questions. One brief disclaimer that we wanted to state is that panelists can choose not to answer a topic or not to answer a question due to the personal nature of the topic. So we also ask participants just to be mindful with the questions and to phrase them all respectfully. So now, if you want to just give your background information, we'll see if any questions come in and go from there. And if it works for you all, we can do the same way that we did before with Ida, then Felicia, then Cheryl.
So I'm Ida Winters. I am the parent of 3 young men, all special healthcare needs, ages 16, 17, and one soon to be 21. My youngest son is 16, and he was diagnosed with autism a week before his 14th birthday. So I do a lot of work with early identification and early intervention. We missed the marker for all of it, but we did attempt to get diagnosis, screening, and evaluation, but we just didn't get it. I work currently with Weissman Center and on various projects because this is something that's near and dear to my heart. And I've done a lot of work with family navigation, and I still do, even using personal time, because this is something that's important in my community. And I do a lot of stuff with policy work. I'm actually right now in DC at a conference for policy, but this was important. So I just took a break to come and talk to you all. So I'll pass it off to Felicia.
Thanks, Ida. Again, my name is Felica Turner-Walton. I am the mother of 6, 2 which are angels. My oldest son was diagnosed with epilepsy at the age of 5. Through that entire process and being a Black mother to my Black son, I didn't know about the services that existed, such as the Weissman Center. He did have a lot of needs, including things related to his IEP. In my personal and professional work, I'm also the founding CEO of Healing Our Hearts Foundation. I am a peer support specialist, as well as a certified grief educator and a parent peer specialist. This work, as Ida mentioned, is so very vital and important, necessary and needed for me, that it doesn't matter what I'm doing, I will drop my hat to show up for children, and most importantly for children that look like my Black son, who did not receive any source of support. So it was about 3 years ago that I became aware of the Weissman Center and the services that the Weissman Center offered. And that was through my granddaughter actually being diagnosed in birth with Turner syndrome. So she is a client there at the Weissman Center, and I'm happy to be here to offer my insight in what can be done to support children like my son, as well as his daughter.
My name is Cheryl Funmaker, and I'm a Native American, with my father being from North Dakota and my mother being from Wisconsin. And I grew up in the Twin Cities in an urban environment. And as an adult, moved back to Wisconsin, where my mother's people are from, and have raised a family here amongst the Ho-Chunk people with my husband. Together we have 4 children. The youngest is now 23, or soon to be 23. And he is the reason that I came into the field of special education and disability. My son was in birth to 3 services all the way through. And we are still sorting out his adult services right now. And I'm an educator. I strongly believe in our cultural teachings and our beliefs, and applying those to our families to help navigate the systems here. We have very distinct cultural differences. We don't have a word for disability traditionally in my language. That doesn't mean disability didn't exist, it did. And then I also try to address equity in our my work with our people. And I see value in both systems, and am a staunch believer that we can be culturally and equity minded in the work that we do. And there's a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you all. We have a few questions starting to come in, so I'll read the first one, and then y'all can just answer as feels right. So the first one is Wisconsin is starting to make some progress with advocacy for people living with a disability, but we have a long way to go. Which areas do you think should be tackled first when it comes to advocating for youth and adults living with a disability? More specifically, what type of resources and services have you noticed are still lacking for the population?
I can go first. Definitely hinting on the more specific question of what types of services or resources have we noticed that are lacking. One of them, I would say, parental support. When you are a parent of a child who has a disability, oftentimes what your mental health is left out of the equation, right? You're in spaces where what you're doing is so important and needed for your child that most of the times you're forgot about. And so I think thinking about that, we should be able to also have advocacy around offering support for the family that also has to go through this experience alongside of their child.
Yes, I'd like to echo what Felicia's saying, which kind of goes into a support network that we're currently piloting, Sankofa Midwest, where we're offering support to the families of children and youth with special health care needs. It's like when you're a parent of a child with a disability or complex medical needs, you know, you need that support, the siblings, the whole family as a whole, because it's a diagnosis, not just for that one person. That diagnosis, it's for the whole family. It's the first day of the rest of your lives. This is something you have to deal with as a whole. So that support is usually not there. They want to focus on the one individual. And a lot of times when the focus is put on that one individual, it puts a lot of strain and resentment on that family as a whole. So that's a big thing. And then another thing is we don't look at it as, yes, this child has a disability or a complex medical need, but there's also parents out here that have disabilities and complex medical needs, and they're the parent of a child too. They need additional support. I know I use lots of time caring for my kids, and I neglect a lot of caring for myself, which I personally have disability and complex healthcare needs too. But I don't have time to have that because I'm dealing with the needs of my children. Or I neglect one child trying to juggle, and all three have medical needs. So, it's a balancing act, and we kind of have to figure out how to balance the scales.
I'm sorry, could the question be repeated?
Yeah. So the question was, which areas do you think should be tackled first when it comes to advocating for youth and adults living with disabilities? And what type of resources or services have you noticed are still lacking?
So I would like to say that within the community that I've worked, the biggest issue has been to hooking our families up to comprehensive services. That would be waiver programs. Many of our families are not enrolled in waiver programs, and then maybe they're not attending IEPs as well. And so what we do is we try to have a trusted individual to work with our families and draw on our community and have mentors of sorts, and a group where we can reach out to one another and ask questions. So I'd say getting the foot in the door to services is the first thing that we try to do. And it takes quite a long time, actually longer than we would think. And so for our particular history, We have a distrust of certain agencies, and especially when it comes to social services and removals and things like that. So, but I would say that getting the foot in the door in whatever system, and that could be even with identification of disability, a diagnosis, that's navigating the health system as well. So.
Cheryl, this is sort of builds off of what you were saying, and I would love to hear Ida and Felicia's take on it as well. Could you share an example of when the disability service system has worked well to support the families that you work with or your family? And could you also provide an example of when it has failed to do so, or when it has conflicted with cultural and values?
As far as the culture piece there, I'm going to say that it wouldn't just be Native communities. I have a feeling that there's other communities where disability is sort of looked at differently. And what we do see is the stigma attached to disability in the mainstream society. And that's what we push back against, as do our kids when they're able to articulate that. So I just want to throw that out there. But the other part of the question there, what we have done is we are mentored throughout our lives. And as old as I am, I'm in my 50s. I'm still mentored by the elder women, my elder relative in our clan. And we reach out to our families often. So when our son first experienced, people were saying there was an issue, we reached out to our relatives actually first. And and they counseled us that everything was fine and don't do anything different. And so we were a little slow to pick up, like getting a diagnosis or signing up for a waiver, because, like I said, we saw as a family some of the stigma, and we didn't want that for him. In our belief, our children are born the way they are. We're born the way we are, and that's that. If that makes sense. So, we were able to access resources through our own social services. Tribes are tight-knit communities, and we had a trusted individual in the department, and so I would ask them questions, and I'd say, well, what is this waiver thing? I don't understand it. What is this diagnosis? And what's this therapy compared to school services? And so I remember that. And so in the capacity of my work, we're trying to bank on that, reaching out to the people that we trust, and building a community. So we have like a family group that really helps, and a family navigator. And people really are kind of floating around out there, not knowing what's going on. I remember that feeling vividly, and it's not pleasant. So we're trying to capitalize on, we want to reach out to our mentors. We want to have safe people to talk to. So it's kind of a broad answer there, but.
Yeah, so just really leaning into the community-based supports, and having more family mentors and people working one-on-one is what's worked well then, it sounds like.
Yes.
Ida and Felicia, do either of you have an example of when social services or services that you've interacted with have worked well, or when they've worked poorly for you, and how that could have been different?
I probably can list million negatively, but I want to speak in a positive experience. Thinking about in a whole, I was working with Wraparound Milwaukee, but I was working with them for one of my other children. And you hear the word wraparound, they're supposed to wrap around the whole family and provide services for the whole family. And I never actually tested that theory to see if it really worked until I had to test the theory to see if it worked. My younger son was facing expulsion from school, and we were having a therapy session with wraparound, and that was what was on my mind at the time. And I spoke about it, and they're like, "Hey, we're here to help." And I didn't know what services or what rights he had as far as school and being expelled and being suspended and everything. And, they were there on the front line and ready. And they're like, no, he shouldn't be suspended. There's nothing in writing. No, she's been asking for an evaluation at school for an IEP. This hasn't been granted. And every step of the way. And I didn't know this. And they're like, nope, take him back to school. He'll be in class today. This needs to be in writing. We need this. He needs that. And they were there. And this was a service for a sibling. And it was to the point, it was like, oh, he has meltdowns in school. He can have a crisis stabilizer, because this does affect the whole family. Because if he's having meltdowns in school, if you're taking off work or taking off school to go to school to tend to him, and you're taking time out of this. And I'm like, oh, so it really does wrap around the whole family. I wasn't utilizing those services because I had one child sign up for this. So I expected to be like other programs, just focus on the one. But after that, after I found that out and seeing how willing and actually helpful they were, I started utilizing the services, and then I started recommending the services to other people because I actually knew what services they did provide and not just advertise that they provided.
And I'll say, much like Ida, kind of the same thing happened with me. So my son was actually diagnosed with epilepsy at, like I said, age of 5, and we were in Mississippi. And it was a lot of advocating that I had to do for him on his behalf, where I just wasn't listened to. And we think about that as a cliche thing, but it isn't a cliche. It's like, when you are in a space or a place where people feel like you don't know what you're talking about, and epilepsy isn't looked at as this huge disability, right? It's just a moment in time of a person going through this. But I think a lot of people not understanding that it affects a lot. It affects the person in whole, things such as urinating on yourself, really being sleepy and tired, not remembering what went on or what happened. So for me, instruction for my son was different. It wasn't until we moved here to Wisconsin that when he got connected to his doctor's office, and they was like, well, there's nothing that we can really do for him. We would prefer to send you up to UW-Madison to see this neurologist. And in that conversation with the neurologist, and I'm telling him what's going on with my son, he's like, I think we really need to have him have another EKG done on him. And so they do all of these things. And he's like, I'll call you back in about 2 weeks to let you know the results of those. Versus 2 weeks, we received that call in 2 days of them saying, no, bring him back in right away. Come to find out, everything that I'd been advocating for in Mississippi was right. I should have been questioning those things because he was on the incorrect medication. They were giving him medication for seizure activity all over his brain when he had seizure activity that actually affected his frontal lobe. And that is when I saw, right, a doctor, and I'll say his name because he really helped my family and my son, Dr. Shaw, back before he moved to Florida. He was the most important person in my son's life at that time who understood, right? And now we're up against we're putting him on new medication. This medication is going to contradict with what he's been taking for the last 4 years. That is going to cause anger issues. That's going to cause him to be a bit irate and frustrated. So just like Ida said, those were a lot of things that the school started to see from him having to switch medications. And when it got to the point of, oh, we're going to suspend him from school, that was where I was able to have a conversation. It's like, no, his doctor has submitted information, and then you all need to get in contact with his doctor. So that's where the process of him getting an IEP came into place, where it began to be really valuable for us, right? Because it was a point where I literally almost lost my job because everything that happened at the school with him, they were calling me to come and get him. And so with Dr. Shaw coming into our lives and being such an instrumental person for him, that is what helped us get the IEP for me to be a fierce advocate at this point for what he needed in the space, and that you don't need to call me when he simply has had a seizure and needs a moment, right? If he needs to go home, he can call my husband to come and get him from school. It doesn't have to be me. And so through that entire process, it was long. I felt like at the end that we had finally broken a barrier that absolutely needed to be broken, and that I did everything right as a parent. It was just the system that was not listening to me.
And I want to jump in very quickly and agree as well. I attend IEPs with our families, and I have a doctorate in special education, and with my years of education and being in the field, I have to use that to the benefit of our students. It's a lot of privilege that many families don't have. And that's what the field says, that special education works best for families of privilege. So we're very fortunate. I'm very fortunate that I was able to go through and get these credentials and wave them around in meetings at schools all these years. And that's, I'm sure that's reflected in the other fields as well.
Yeah, so one thing that all of you have touched on is just really listening and having that established trust. But as we talked about earlier, sometimes, especially in the social work field, there's been such a history, a bad history of interaction between communities and the profession. So one of the questions we have is, as a social worker or as the profession of social work, how do we build back that trust that has been lost? And how can providers work to establish a relationship that allows them to both provide the additional support, get you connected to not only resources, but the right resources? How does one establish strong trust?
There's been many instances, definitely in the Black community, where mistrust has shown up. We can go all the way back to the Tuskegee experiment, right? And beyond. It's hard, one of the things that I share through our LEND program, which I am a part of as a family advocate, to students who are graduate students and going to school, that if you don't use your voice for the people in which you are serving, you're doing an injustice, and you are much more a part of the problem than you are the solution, right? When we see things that are occurring in communities, right, underprivileged, whether we want to call them underprivileged communities, low to marginalized communities, whatever you want to say, we have to also know that human beings are human beings. It's not about a color or any of those things. And so to sum that up, I think it takes you we like to throw around the thought of listening to Black people or listening to Black women, but when reality, it's about listening to people. We live with ourselves and our children each and every single day. We know what they're going through, what this experience looks like for us. And when you depreciate the value of simply being a mother, right? And then, of course, of a skin complexion, when those are the things that you use to depreciate that value, you're causing more harm. And so I think it's so very important and necessary that you show up, right? You really are truly an ally, and that you really are truly a co-conspirator. That looks like going out into communities, showing up, not just utilizing people for research, not just using them when it helps you to fit the bill that you are trying to fit.
Yeah, I totally agree with Felicia. And I say, listen, ask questions, show up, don't just extract information. It's a knowledge exchange. It's give and take. You have to look at it as community. People love community. There was a study done before where they had people wear these jerseys, and majority of the people wore jerseys. We'll use, for instance, we'll use Minnesota Vikings jerseys and Packers jerseys, and some people had no jerseys on. And there were majority people in Vikings jerseys. So the people who saw most people in Vikings jerseys, they were like rooting for the people in Vikings jerseys because they had on the Vikings jerseys and there were more. And somebody got hurt that had on a Packers jersey, and more people walked past and didn't help them. And they were said they were more likely to help a person who didn't have on a jersey with a name on it at all than somebody that had on the lesser one, because they were more into community and looking for separation. But when they put everybody in and they all just had on blank jerseys, everybody was more likely to help the ones that looked, because they all look the same. So we all need to look into community and where it is the common ground where we're just alike, and recognize we're all the human race. And it's a good connection when we realize everybody has something in common. We all need something. We all need health care. We all need good health. We have that in common, and that's the little bit that we can connect on. And if nothing else, we can discuss that.
Cheryl, do you have anything to add for how to earn back or gain back that trust for social workers?
I think that it's very apparent when someone has done work on themselves to be anti-racist and culturally responsive. Those are two different things. And I think that our people, and I'm sure every community is this way, we love to bring people into our community, but we can tell if somebody is authentic about that or not. And we want, so we can be the best allies, and that I really don't think that's ever been tapped into, not really. And so the best thing, just from our family perspective, we've had people who have attended our cultural, like a powwow, or come to some, like a basketball tournament. People that if we see out and about in our community, say hello. And I know that there's some concerns about confidentiality and whatnot. But not everyone has that same border, I guess, or, it's worth discussing in a separate conversation about that. But I would say that, like I said, anybody who's done some work about being culturally responsive and not judgmental is the big thing. So if somebody doesn't elect to do a service, give them some breathing room and ask them later, if there's someone that they'd like to talk to later revisit it. In our community, I've been taught to not speak quickly. That's why I ask people to repeat things a number of times to make sure I think about things. And we always can have the capacity to, and are encouraged to revisit things in general, so we revisited. Initially, we didn't want anything to do with diagnoses and waiver programs and things like that. But we thought about things and we talked to people that we trusted. And one of them was a social worker. And we were able to, that's very successful, that you can have somebody who can, you can reach out to later to talk about things as well,
So truly showing up is what I'm hearing, with a lot of listening and then following through, not just talking about things, but putting action behind it. This sort of shifts the topic a little bit, but I know you all have a lot of experience working in different groups and working with individuals with disabilities. So this question is, how do you collaborate and conspire with adults with disabilities around disability justice issues? And knowing that there's a tension sometimes between parents and disabled adults or adults with disabilities over things like language or other types of supports. What are examples where you have worked collaboratively with others? So basically, when have you worked collaboratively with adults with disabilities? And how do you manage parent-child conflict in a way that's productive?
For me, well, like I said, my son is 26 years old now. He's really an adult. And so oftentimes we still clash, right? Him not wanting to completely accept, right, that he has this disability, because again, it goes back to the world's view of what disability is. And oftentimes it seems like if it's a person who is not physical, if it isn't a physical disability, then it's often not recognized, right? And so for him, it's, well, do I really have this thing? I know I forget things sometimes, but everybody does that, right? And it's like, no, you've been diagnosed with this thing. You need to utilize the support that you have, right, as it relates to being in this space. And for us, I think it really showed up in school for him, where there were like extracurricular activities such as football and things like that he wanted to do that he just could not partake in. So imagine this 14, 15-year-old boy who's now, a freshman in high school, and he's becoming to a place where he can advocate for himself. And it's like, no, you can't play football. You can't withstand that hit that you receive. But it was Dr. Shaw who said, let him do those things. And it's like, I'm afraid as the mother. And so now I've given him, even right now at 26, I'm still on him. Did you take your medicine? Did you do this? He's like, Mom, I got this. And it's like, okay, I can back a little bit. So allowing them, I think, to make decisions as it relates to themselves and their healthcare is one of the most important things, bringing them into the conversation. Tammy Baldwin says it best. Oftentimes, when you're outside of the room, the conversation is about you. But when you're in the room, the conversation is with you. So allowing him into that conversation as early as 14 or 15 years old is why we are where we are today. And he's able to advocate for himself. I don't have to do that all the time. I can kind of stand in the background and be his coach if he needs.
Oh, yes, I agree with you, Felicia, that autonomy. That's the best. I have an adult child, even though he's not making the best decisions right now for healthcare, but which he has a provider right now that I'm not agreeing with the plan that he has, but it's my son's decision to keep him. But I always think about, it's his life, and sometimes, sometimes it's peak, sometimes there's valleys, and sometimes we have to go through it to get to where we're going. But I have to think about myself and anybody else. You have disabilities, and sometimes your disability doesn't show and it's not at the forefront. So instead of thinking about it as disabilities, a lot of time it's variabilities. And that's how our life goes. Today, it varies. And today I might feel great, and today I may not have a disability. It's not shown. And a lot of times they're having a good day today, let them enjoy the day and not just saying, remember you have a disability, so don't do that. I'm like Felicia with the sports thing. All of my boys wrestle, and my middle son, he has a bleeding disorder. So I was absolutely no to football. But he wanted to wrestle, and he wrestled, and there was no incident. And, he's still beating down the walls telling me, you should have let me play football. But I mean, and that's the thing, a lot of times with the young adults and the youth, we disable them more by constantly reminding them that they have a disability, instead of letting sometimes it being a variability or diverse ability. And we're supposed to let them live their best life, or their life to their fullest. And a lot of time we hinder them from that and thinking we're protecting them, but a lot of time we're protecting ourselves. So how do we work collaboratively? We need to find out what their goals are and how they feel about it. And a lot of time we don't ask that because we feel we know best, and they're not ready to make these decisions. So sometimes we have to get our little heart and our feelings crushed, but we learn and we live, we learn. And our thing is to pass on to other parents what it is that we learn to help them along their journey.
I have to agree with Ida, and I didn't say my son wrestled too, Ida, and he would have went state 1 point, and because the referee didn't call the call in time. So those are the types of things that we're talking about that are so very vital and important for them to have their own autonomy over their bodies. And that, anytime his body hit the mat, there was me standing up, like nervous of, oh my God, is he going to have a seizure? So I can attest and agree there.
Just as a quick reminder, the question again was about collaborating with adults with disabilities around disability justice issues and how to work with families and make sure that the family-child balance is there. Cheryl, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Otherwise, we can move on to another question.
Oh, yeah. So I think that we've tried to support our son to make his choices. We do a lot of prep work. about different kinds of choices. You know, if you choose to stay up till 4 and you have class at 9, what's going to happen? We also have to prep them on, when I think of disability justice, you know, my son is a hulking 375 pounds and 6'2", visibly Native American. You know, we have to work with him about, you know, maybe not walk around in the middle of the night in the wealthy neighborhood where you're going to school, you know, things like that. We try to, because I'm well aware of some of the more troubling, devastating things that happen to people with disabilities from other races. But one of the other things we do when it comes to my son is we have really done a lot of work for his self-esteem. For him, he's not visibly disabled, but he is, and he's just different enough where you know, he can't make friends, you know, and it's pretty tough, but and he could be, so we do a lot of work about reasserting our values and to take away the stigma of disability, because sometimes that really hampers him. You know, he doubts, he wants to be a social worker. We have him in school and he's doing wonderful things, but he second guesses himself quite a bit. And so that's been the case all the way through school. And so we've had to really talk about, you know, the way schools are set up to prize individuals and contest that and reassert some of our tribal ideas about learning and the value of people. And so we've had to do a lot of what I call decolonization, so that he can feel, because he's not going to overcome anything. You know, you know, his learning is the way it is. And so, you know, we have to make sure that he values himself. So in my mind, you know, disability justice looks at how to instill that pride in our people who learn differently and can do different things. And you know, so I think that that's the way we've kind of looked at it from a personal perspective.
Thank you all. We've talked a lot about a lot of different concepts, and one of the questions we have here is, how do you communicate to your children about their disability? When we're living in a world like this where there's a lot of systemic inequity and bias around disability, I'm sure that can be, it would look different for every family. So how do you all communicate to your children about their disability?
For me, of course, with my son, I think kind of being the oldest in the space, this is when he was 9 years old, where his actual teacher in the middle of class blurted out some things about him having a disability, and he pees on himself. I think that was his first experience with his classmates knowing that something was different about him specifically. And that it was at that moment that I had to sit him down and say, hey, this is what you have. This is what you were diagnosed with. But this is also a part of you that makes you uniquely different than the next person. It's not right. It was a conversation of telling him that it wasn't something to criminalize him because he was different than other children. It was something that made him who he was, uniquely Jamarius, uniquely the child that I raised, the child that I created. And just because his, his disability wasn't something that people could see, but it was also up to him to educate people on what epilepsy is and to let them know that this is what epilepsy looks like. It looks like me. And so through that and through me being able to do that with him, right, there were other children who eventually came out and talked about the different things of them having even siblings with disability in their classrooms. And it was a conversation, with this teacher, like that was not the place in a class of 8, 9-year-olds who did not understand what epilepsy was in the first place, for you to share something like that, in which it caused hurt and harm to him. And to teach him to educate his teachers about his disability. And this is what could show up. For my son, he had absence seizures a lot at class, and that could look like him staring off or into space for 30 to 45 minutes. And it was him walking to his classrooms, moving forward to 5th and 6th grade and things like that, telling his teachers, look, yes, I have epilepsy. Yes, this is what it looks like. You probably need to pay attention to me a little bit more than you do the other kids. If you see me staring off, then I'm probably having a seizure. It's nothing you can do about it other than when you see it, make me go to the nurse's office because I'm probably going to urinate on myself. So he made it this conversation to where he began to be an advocate for himself in the space. And because that's what we were teaching him, is how to advocate for yourself, not to let anyone else make your disability a martyr or something to joke about.
Yeah, so I started talking to my youngest son about his disability early on. Like I knew something was different about him. We just hadn't had a name or diagnosis or a label for anything. And we pretty much summed it up to, because the kids were telling him he was weird and he thought he knew everything. And they're like, don't talk to us, you're weird. You think you know everything. And he just say, my brain just processes things differently from others. And, he just walked on about his way. And after I had done enough research and looked up things, I'm like, think you have autism. No, don't believe everything you see on TV. It doesn't look like that. And, we talked over it. And he's the kind, and he's kind of on the spectrum to the point where when he gets into something, he really gets into it. So he did his research. And it's funny when you're looking, you have this 7, 8-year-old doing research, but he's doing his research and he's like, yeah, I can agree, this is me. So, it was a conversation. He did his research. Now he's a junior in high school and he has other kids like, hey, I have a brother who has autism, or I know a kid who has autism, but their autism isn't like yours. And they're asking for advice and they're like more accepting. And it's kind of like, I'm pushing them like, there's always space in the disability world for young advocates, because accepting and normalizing, this is our world, and let people know it's not what you see on TV. And like Felicia said, it's not looking to be a martyr. Let people know we're human too.
Does anyone else have anything to say on that question, or should I move on? Okay, we'll keep going then. Did any of you have experience with disability or health advocacy before you had to advocate for your children? And what do you credit as being the source of learning for you and your family?
I did. So I have a cousin who's very close in age to me. She's 36. And she was actually diagnosed with cerebral palsy. She's been in a wheelchair her entire life. She is nonverbal. And that was my first experience with disability. And one that was, right, a physical disability where, you know, her mom had to do everything for her. And so we, at some point, ended up in school at the same time together. And it was always the thing of what's wrong with her. And for me, it was, well, she has cerebral palsy. She is a nonverbal person, but she understands completely what you're saying because she laughs when something's funny. Yes, you may see she wears a towel around her because, you know, her spit does protrude, but she's a human being. And so for me early on, it was utilizing, right, my experience with my cousin that made me aware of there's differences in people, and they all look different. Just because they may not be able to verbalize or speak, you know, or they can't walk, that doesn't mean that they're not human. So that was my space with it. And then I think the other part of it, what do you credit as the best source of learning? That was just going through the experience. I don't think that there's anything outside of the lived experience that can prepare you for what you're dealing with, because like Ida said earlier, what we see on TV is completely different than actually what most of at least our children, what disability looks like. We see a lot of the completely negative aspects of having or being a person with a disability versus you can have a self-fulfilling, thriving life as a person with a disability. And so I think just that lived experience and your family dynamic really makes up the best learning source. Education can't prepare you for what lived experience looks like.
So for me, I had experience with disability prior to my children, for myself, and I didn't advocate for myself. My mother, she didn't advocate for me either. She, you know, my grandparents were born in 1924, and it was kind of like in our culture, you're lazy, get up and do whatever. So that was kind of the thing. And nothing was wrong with me. I'm young. And the doctor kept telling my mother, she's young, get up and do whatever. So, you know, that's what I'm doing. So I didn't advocate for myself. I just kept trying to do things. And when I wasn't able to do for myself, I just got more and more depressed because I'm young. I should be able to get up and do things. But once I had my children, that's what changed. And I'm like, no, I see the way he can't move, or he's in pain, or he just can't grasp this concept, or his fine motor skills just aren't there. I can see this, and I'm like, no. And then I'm starting to look into things and talking to people, and I'm like, no, it has to be more to this. It's not just laziness, because I see he wants to button his shirts like everybody else wants to button their shirts. I see him staring at the group of people, and I see him on the sidelines laughing as if he's interacting with the other kids, but he can't do it. He's just stuck. And I'm like, that's not laziness. So it's like the learning, I had to talk to other people and look into other things to learn about advocacy, because I'm just like, sometimes you do have to make noise. You might not want to make noise or rock the boat, but sometimes you have to make noise in order to get the things that you need.
In our family situation, and none of us had any experience with disability. And so it was all fairly new. And I would say that in terms of learning the most, Trying to help our son regulate. We learned a lot trying to figure out how he worked with his sensory needs and things like that. He was nonverbal for quite a long time. And so I would have to say, yes, I agree with, I believe it was Felicia who talked about the lived experience. I also had the benefit, however, of having a background in education and working with children. And so unfortunately for us, all my years as being an educator, I still didn't know. I have an extensive bag of tricks when it comes to children, and have always been pretty successful with them until it came to my son. And that was the biggest lesson for me, because he needed things and I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know how to help him. So the lived experience for sure, and reaching out, probably having an open mind, to accessing other resources like a waiver program or therapy, things like that.
Ida, you talked about the wraparound care earlier, which relates to this question. When a sibling is diagnosed with a disability or a complex need, is it easy for families to shift a lot of their focus to that child? And how can that be explained to the siblings appropriately? And how can social workers help to support the sibling as well as the rest of the family?
So I'm gonna, that's a very complex question. So my 17-year-old, he was diagnosed at 3 with a bleeding disorder. So at that time he had an older brother and a younger brother. So, the focus was just on him and his health care, even though I knew something was going on with his younger brother. So, it's like the older one, I don't have to worry about. The younger one, well, he's okay because they didn't say anything about him. So we could focus just on him. But then by the time the younger one got into school, he's having issues at school. And in order for him to stay in school, I had to be at school with him all day. So I'm trying to figure out how to balance that. Then my older son, when he had strep twice. That was the only time he had been sick. And for his 18th birthday, he got extremely sick. And I've never had to focus on his health ever before. And it was kind of like COVID started, he turned 18 and he's been hospitalized. And I forgot about those two. And it's kind of like, after a month, when I come home, finally, they're really angry because it's never been when I've had to take focus off of them. So it's very hard to shift the focus. And during COVID, it's a hard time. They try in the hospital to accommodate siblings, but nobody's allowed in the hospital. So you can't do that. Family is a big part, family and community, which there was very little communication and access to that during the time where I had to try to figure out how to restructure that. And Zoom wasn't as robust as it is now. So there's a lot there, but only good thing was we had experienced already what it was like to have a child that had a diagnosis, and my boys are older. But when they're younger, it's harder to understand because it's like, mom's always here, mom can always do this, or mom can do that. And when he did come home, a lot of family could not come by and visit because now he's doing chemotherapy and nobody can come visit, and it's COVID time. So there's a lot of factors, but they feel like they're being restricted. We can't go visit family. No family can visit us. We can't do this or that. So it's a lot, but it's all in the family relationship, the family dynamics. Social workers, big part was we didn't have social workers working with us, but my oldest son's school, they have advisors at the school, which are they're kind of like counselors, but the school doesn't have counselors. They kept in contact with the family and they kept calling and asking us, what was it that we needed? Is there something that they can do to support the other boys? And they brought games to the house. They asked how much is your re-energy bill? We can pay that. Things like that. Is it something that we can do? They took them out for frisbee golf and they did that, small little things like that. And by this time we were out of the wraparound program, but they knew just a little gesture to give me a break was something that can help. And sometimes it's just asking, are you okay? Do you need anything? Or sending a nice card in the mailbox. That's something nice. And that was just it. Sometimes, how are you?
So in our family, I think that what we tried to do is my mother and my extended family and the siblings, we were able to rely on each other. And we try to teach our children that there's a cycle to everything. And so one child may need, focus, and then another child, will need their time in the light. We try to, look at it as a cyclical thing, as far as like attention to, different family members. Another way of explaining it is I devoted quite a bit of my last few years to my mother and my grandmother with their aging issues. And so I think that it's, helpful to also, we have like family events. And so we have events for siblings, the siblings come along. And then, there's support for all the family, like parents get to step away for a while, talk to other parents, and all the kids get to play together. So, I think that, just for us, we try to explain that everyone has needs, to kind of normalize that, and we all have different needs, at different stages in our lives. So that's something that we've tried to teach all of our children, actually. So that might be a way to look at it.
For me, this was a huge struggle in my family. My son, of course, was the oldest, and a boy. And then 2 years after him was my daughter, who was born without any type of disabilities. And so, as I said, they're from Mississippi, where I spent pretty much all of my childhood. And so when we moved here to Wisconsin, we didn't have much support. And so it was really hard for me to explain to my daughter, who just always wanted the mommy-daughter time, right, that my son required a bit more attention than her because of the type of seizures disorder that he had. Like I said, he had absent seizures. And so it was literally me sometimes sitting there for hours and just watching him, not wanting anyone else to keep him. My mother-in-law and my ex-husband's siblings, they didn't really know what to look for. And so those mommy-daughter dates all ended up looking like mommy-daughter-son dates, where we always, when it was me and my daughter, my son would still be there as well. And so she didn't really grasp, we're going to get our nails painted and your brother has to go with us. And so it was really hard in this space. As I said, I wasn't aware that anything such as the Wiseman Center or even respite actually existed in my area, because no one talked about those services to me. I didn't hear about them in the school, and being that the neighborhood that we lived in, predominantly white, the teachers or social workers, no one really shared about those things to us. And so for us, it was really, really hard. She began to be in a space where, as she grew older, she understood, right, that, wait, my brother has a disability and it's nothing that he did to cause it. And it doesn't mean, mom doesn't love me anymore. And as she was about 14 or 15 when she finally had that conversation with me, that it was even hard for her, right, being a sibling, and not having, the things that she felt like she wanted or needed from me, or us having those private and intimate moments. And so it's so vital and important that we are letting them know, right? In a panel that I heard, and much like my daughter, it brought me to tears, because it was really her in spaces where she had to advocate for her brother when she would see him walking to the office, because they just thought he was, being rude or being disrespectful and things like that, where she's like, no, so much so that she's went up against teachers at the school, like, no, my brother has epilepsy. You don't handle him. Don't touch his head. And so those types of things where they get so much more concerned about their sibling than themselves, that they end up having to show up for their siblings, which sometimes feel like it takes away from them enjoying their child.
Thank you for sharing that, Felicia. We have a couple comments about SIB shops, which is the Wisconsin program for siblings of children with disabilities. Have any of your kids participated in SIB shops? No. So we've had a lot of difficult questions come up during this, and I think I personally would really love to hear one story that just brings you a lot of joy with your children, especially your child with a disability. So maybe before, because we're coming up on the end of time, but could all of you give a story that just really highlights the fun times? Or something that brings a smile to your face?
I think of when Jamarius was first, when he first went to the UW hospital, to the neurology clinic, and Dr. Shaw walks in and he says, "Whoa, you're brown like me." and And as he's talking to us, telling him what he's going to be doing, he's like, "So I get to get this jelly on my head again, right? So you're going to do all of this stuff that they've already did in Mississippi to me." And he's like, "Yeah, except we're going to find out the main issues and the main causes, basically." And as he's telling him these things, I could sense from my son, just, we're going to get the answer to how I can actually be supported, right? Because I've been hearing my mom go off on my doctor in Mississippi, who was just a pediatrician, who never referred me to a neurology clinic. And it was almost like he sensed the sigh of relief that I had, that we now have a doctor who actually gives a hoot. And he developed his own relationship with Dr. Shaw too. He's like, Mom, I got this. I can have these conversations. And so, you know, even when he had to do blood draws, he's like, I'm only doing this for you, Dr. Shaw, because I hate to have my drug drawn, my blood drawn. It hurts. And, and Dr. Shaw told him, well, if you do this for me, then the outcome that you're going to have on the other side is going to be so great. And I promise you, you're going to do the things that you want to do. And that ended up looking like, as me and Ida talked about, football and wrestling. And so he got what he wanted. And I could literally have a sigh, right? To say, okay, he's safe, he's okay. But I'm going to every single game, whether it's home or away, I'm going to be present, right? I made sure his coaches knew, so they were 100% aware. And once he felt like, I think he was in a place to not only advocate as this little boy for himself, that it also created this advocate, this man who now advocates for his daughter, right? And still advocates for himself, as it even relates to other things in the world, not just his disability, right? So through all of that, and through a doctor looking at a child and taking them under his wing, it's definitely my child, taking him under his wing to take time to address his questions and concerns, to let him feel that the needle, so to speak, that they were putting the little jelly in his head with, that it wasn't actually going to hurt him. Those things are needed and necessary for him. I mean, even for me, because like Ida said earlier, we're more afraid than the children are, right? They're the resilient ones, and we're the ones who are scared.
I just think about what is something that's really, I think about. So basically my sons, they've had the same pediatrician basically since birth. And I think about the relationship we've built with the pediatrician for the number of years. And we have children-led appointments. Yes, I call in, I schedule the appointments, and I tell them what the topic is going to be of the appointment, why we're calling. But when we go in, my children lead the visits. The pediatrician learned early on, I'm an only parent, so every appointment, every child's coming, so she knows pull every child's file. And even if she comes in the room, at least she's going to see at least one of the other one's toes or ears or whatever, but she never complained about that. And every time, she's examining one. And even now, with them being big boys, she's asking when I come in with one, how's the other boys? And she still calls and asks, when she hasn't seen us a while, she calls and checks at home to see, how we're doing. But like my son, he doesn't like people touching him, but he's okay with her touching. And she's like, oh, hi, Baran, how are you? And he's like, fine. And she's like, is it okay if I touch you today? And he's like, yeah, you can touch me, but the other doctors can't touch me, or the nurse can't touch me. And, that's the thing. And like, he has a thing where at school, a lot of meltdowns is because the teacher puts their hand on his shoulder. And she asked him about that. And he's like, personal space. And he's like, but you've been touching me for a long time. And I'm like, Brian, you can't tell people that she's been touching you. That doesn't sound really good. But he's like, she touches me all the time. So, he says things and they're meant in a different way, but he says them and they're kind of funny, but that's just him.
I think for our son, the last time, our most recent time that he says quite a few things throughout the years. He's like one of our relatives who kind of surprises us. And so we had a family event, and our son is compassionate, and we don't always realize the extent of that. And he had the opportunity to kind of talk to the other youngsters in our family group, and it was of his own doing, and we were kind of in awe of that. And for us, that's being a good relative, and that's one of the things that we aspire to. So we are pretty happy with a lot of the pulling together of the work we do with him and for him.
And then we're coming up on the 10-minute mark. So maybe for the couple of last questions, or for the time we have left, one question was, do you all have a mantra that helps you when you're caregiving or gives you strength in times that you need it?
Mine is, it's just words, not really a pact or anything. Divine timing, and each divine day creates divine intervention. That is, everything happens for a reason. If we come to it, it's one of our feats that we have to defeat. And as I think about intervention, right, and where that piece comes in, is that we can intervene on behalf, right, of our children, or we can intervene with our children, right? And that goes back to one of the, I think, biggest sayings that everybody has, where two or more are gathered. So if I'm intervening for my child, what we can get out of that together in timing creates a better outcome than me going in and just advocating on my own or on my lows, because he's the person who lives with us each day. I'm just affected by his circumstance.
Yeah, for me, I think I want to be the person that I wish I would have had, that I needed going along my journey. And I also think if no one does it, will it ever get done? Somebody has to start it.
Mhm.
No mantra for me. It's something I'm still learning to work on, and been quite a bit of worry throughout the years. And so for me, the thing I'm working on is to breathe, not anxiety breathing, but calm breathing. So that would be my mantra: breathe.
Yeah, we do have one question that is very important. So we're gonna probably end with this one, but just want to recognize that this is also challenging topic, I think. So I'm gonna put it in the chat for Cheryl and everyone else to read. But the question is, a lot of social work students are going to be connected to either CPS or schools, where mandated reporting of concerns about special needs children often brings down the power and control of the CPS and legal system onto the families. What recommendations do you have to encourage those new social workers to not become the power brokers and harm agents, but supporters of the children and families they're trying to serve?
I'm absolutely going to say, first and foremost, don't assume. Do not assume. Every family, every household looks differently. I know in my family, my grandmother raised me and 5 cousins, and none of us had a disability. My grandmother didn't clean up every single day. She cleaned up on Saturdays because she worked Monday through Friday to provide, a stable household for us all to be in. And so thinking about several of my friends who are parents of autistic children, some of them 1, some of them 2 to 3, man, like you can't have the expectation just because you walk in a person's house on a Tuesday at 10 a.m. that this is the way that it should look. What you should ask versus assuming is that, is there anything that I can help you with? Are you, do you see that that child is physically harmed or not, right? You can ask the children, like, how are you? And sometimes they can't respond to you, but absolutely have a conversation with mom. What does your day look like, right? And often that comes up because I hear so many times, even from Ida and other women who I'm connected to, Friday may look completely different than Saturday. It's going to look completely different than Monday. And so when you think about that, just because on Tuesday you had a successful journey of getting your autistic child out of the house at 7:30, it could be that on Thursday that you're not out of that door until 10 o'clock because that child had a meltdown. And in regards to that child having a meltdown, they broke things, they damaged things in the house. And then here you are expected to be at mom's house at 10:30 and things are completely torn up. And so now you're wondering what's going on, right? And just because that mom, oftentimes as mothers, right, it's a fine line between motherhood is almost like a penalty in ways and forbid having a child with a special healthcare need. But no one asks you what you need, right? And while people think that overstimulation isn't real, it absolutely is. And if an autistic child is overstimulated, and that's the way that it sometimes shows up, you best believe that a mother having 2 or 3 autistic children in the household and then also having to care for herself, go to work, figure out all of these things, she's absolutely 100% overstimulated. And the last thing that she needs is for Child Protective Services to come in her home to take or remove her children when she's doing the absolute best that she can do.
Wow, Felicia, that's hard to follow up behind, but I totally agree. And a lot of times it looks like we have everything put together on the outside or whatever, and we get these calls, you come in for whatever. It's kind of like learn about different cultures and learn about the family before you come in with the assumptions or this report or whatever. A lot of people do mean things for mean reasons. And a lot of time that power, it can break a person completely. And I tell people, listen, my house is a mess, my car is a mess, and so is my life. But tomorrow I'm going to get my life together. And I'll just end on that.
I think that I'm going to assume that most of the attendees at this conference are students. And to seek out, I encourage you as a student to seek out internships or take courses, to explore the different kinds of communities that are out there, and to do work on self-reflection, the cultural responsivity piece, again, the anti-racism, to do the hard work of understanding, your particular background and what your conceptions are of the world around us. I also think that there should be, opportunity for people as professionals to reach out to colleagues and develop collaborative relationships, say with tribal social work. I know there's like other agencies out there that, to develop relationships with these different kinds of agencies that are out there that work in, diverse communities.
So thank you so much to all of our panelists today for all of the insight and experiences and knowledge that you shared. It's very much appreciated. And I know that they gave everyone in attendance a lot that can be reflected upon and thought about and searched further. But we are coming to an end. It's 3:29. I guess in the last few moments here while we're transferring to end, is there any organizations, local or state, that you would like to plug?
I think really for the end, what I would like to say here, there was one question about a parent who feels like that she's exploiting the services. There are many ways, right, that you can show appreciation to your doctors and providers, but to know that that's not necessary for you to do. But if you feel like that is something that you want to do, that looks like giving back, right? Giving back to other people in your community, supporting others, providing, helping to share resources, all of those different types of things. There are many in our area. I know we have 2 respite services specifically that kind of work with people who have different types of disabilities, all types of disabilities, and that's Reach Dane, and then Geo's Garden. They absolutely need people to offer respite services, and that could look different for each person. And if you are receiving services, it's because you need them, so not the fact that you are exploiting any types of service. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist.
I just want to say, a lot of time, a little kind word goes a long way. A lot of time parents don't feel like they're doing a good job. It doesn't look like they're doing a good job to others, or sometimes it's just a mental thing. Just sometimes tell them that they're a good parent and they're doing a good job. Even though it doesn't look perfect, they're still doing a good job of what the knowledge is that they have and the resources that they have, and just letting them know they're doing a good job, or to tell them, just keep trying, keep doing what you're doing. That little bit means a lot, because I probably quit 30 times a day, but that little bit of inspiration, it helped me so much along the way.
All right. Cheryl, is there any last remark you want to make, or last comment?
I really think that if participants have the avenue to look at a disability studies lens, take a class, do some training in that, I think that would be extremely helpful, because in general, disability is stigmatized in the wider society. And just like we look at ourselves in terms of race and culture, we also need to do that when it comes to disability, so that we don't inadvertently apply that kind of stigma to the people we work with.
Right. Well, that brings us to the end. Thank you all so much for your attention and for attending. And maybe Tracy can say where to go for information about CEUs. If not, it's definitely on the conference website.
Yes, I was gonna say, I'm not the person to ask about that, but I know that it's definitely on the website. And I also want to thank Ida and Cheryl and Felicia. It is just such a powerful panel. Thank you so much for sharing so graciously.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, I will hang our webinar up. Thank you.